Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. This is episode 259. We're in the new year. We're on a roll. We've got some fantastic guests, and we've got a fantastic guest this week as well. We've got Rachel Cherry. She works for Disney. She's been a leading member of WP-Campus, a great member of the WordPress community. And we thought we would have her on the show and we'll have a bit of a discussion. Would you like to introduce yourself, Rachel, to the audience a little bit?
Hi, good morning. So I am a senior software engineer at the Walt Disney Company. I've been there, April will be 2 years, which is kind of insane. I moved out here to Los Angeles from Alabama, where I was born and raised. I went to school at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Then I got my start in higher education and worked at several universities, and Mississippi University for Women being one, Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, and then I made my way back to Tuscaloosa and worked about 5 years or so at the University of Alabama. And then that was when I came to Disney. So I spent about 10, 11 years in higher ed before Disney, mostly web development, a little web design, things like that. I actually was a graphic designer for a little bit. That's what I have my degree in. So I've been around a little bit, but I've really enjoyed all of my experience and my time with higher ed, which led to WP-Campus. So I am the director and founder of WP-Campus, which is a community for people that use WordPress in higher education. And so we are an ongoing online and fairly active community, mostly in Slack, which is really great, a lot of fun. And then we have 2 conferences every year. We have our virtual conference coming up at the end of this month on January the 30th, which is really great. It's free all day from 9 a.m. Central to 5 p.m. Central. And then we have an in-person conference in the summer, which we should be announcing the dates for soon. So we're really excited about that. And that one has been going on. Those conferences have now been going on for a couple years. They're a lot of fun. We also have a podcast and a bunch of other resources. It's a great group to be a part of.
Oh, that's great, Rachel. And I've got my co-host, Kim Shivler. Would you like to introduce yourself, Kim?
Absolutely. I'm Kim Shivler. I'm an instructional design consultant and communication strategist, and filling in here as the co-host with Jonathan Denwood.
Oh, definitely. And I'm the founder of WP-Tonic. We're a maintenance support company with an emphasis on membership and learning management systems. But before we go into the rest of the interview, I've got to quickly talk about the sponsor of the show, and that's Kinster Hosting. Now, Kinster, we've moved the WP-Tonic website about 3 months ago. It went flawlessly. Absolutely being delighted with the support and with the quality of the hosting in general. They're a sponsor of our Wednesday interview shows, and I can't highly rate them anymore, really. So if you're looking for a great specialized WordPress hosting company or for your clients, go to the WP-Tonic site. In the show notes there will be a link. It is an affiliate link, I like to point out, but if you utilize it, you'll be supporting the show as well. And there's also some banners on all the key pages that will take you to Kinster. And I suggest you should use them because they're great. So we're going to go back into our interview with Rachel. So Rachel, so in education, you've got a very diverse platform of different technologies that have been utilized by community colleges, universities, and other forms of educational institutions. Very strong kind of enclosed platforms, and then you've got open source as well. How do you think in general WordPress is doing as being seen as a platform that a institution can utilize as their essential web platform, basically?
It does very well. I think open source as a whole just really fits in well with higher ed because of kind of their underlying kind of principles of like open education and open publishing of information and such like that. So In my experience, most universities usually use some kind of open source platform. Some are closed off, but are proprietary. And they also, the ones that do use open source will usually use more than one. And kind of because of that nature, because they want everyone to be able to use kind of whatever they're comfortable with. And although there's a limit because they still have to support it in the end. So it's usually one or two. WordPress being very popular, Drupal also being very popular. I've seen experience with, Joomla, things like that. So it's kind of open-ended in that way. But WordPress is probably the most popular. And because what usually happens in higher ed, especially in larger universities, is that you have very scattered content creators. You'll have a few web professionals who set up the platforms and educate and train people on campus on how to manage, their website. But then there's not enough web professionals on campus to do everything. And so they kind of have to hand it off to content creators who are usually, like a professor or an administrative assistant or an office manager in a department, things like that. And so it's a really interesting, almost kind of, you could say case study for how WordPress is used and how content management systems are helpful, and also to how to make sure you're doing it right. In higher ed, a lot of the concerns generally revolve around fresh content and accessible content. And so accessible being more important. And from a legal standpoint, in higher education, if you receive federal funding, you are required by law to be accessible. Mm-hmm. And so that can be tricky in an open source content management system where you have large amounts of content creators, and how do you control the content and make sure it's accessible? And that's where other tools come in handy. But that's definitely a main concern. And then freshness of content. A lot of problems that we would have is where people would copy and paste content, move it around. Then in the original source, it would get updated, but it wouldn't get updated everywhere else. This is where I was really excited about, like, the REST API coming into WordPress, because this would start to help with that problem, because you could put information that you want to be widely available in an API feed, and then people could just pull from that. I'm not sure how many people are really taking advantage of that, but that, from my point of view, was what I was really excited about for it. Also in higher ed, you have a lot of different, I guess you could call, viewpoints for the web. So you have your websites, but you also have machinery, you have kiosks, you have things like that. You have people walking around with devices on taking tours and things like that. You have a lot of outlets for your information. And so that's where the API can really come in handy for making sure your information is spread around to where you need it. So that's really cool. There's lots of really interesting use cases for various WordPress functionality in higher ed, and the fact that anyone on campus can come in and easily extend it or customize it without having to go through a proprietary system is really helpful, and kind of what makes the difference.
Yeah, I think that's great, Rachel, because I think you think that the REST API probably has made a big difference, because I think it was one of the strongest arguments against WordPress compared to Drupal, where you, because like in the University of Reno, I know that for a number of years that's been a Drupal shop. Almost all the websites, apart from not exclusively, but almost all the websites in the University of Reno are driven by Drupal. And I think that was one of the big arguments for it compared to WordPress. In the scenario of need, basically. So I think that's good news. But you were saying about accessibility and about the problems when you got in an educational environment about keeping it accessible. You hinted there's some tools and methodologies to help with that. You'd like to go into a little bit more detail about that?
So there are a fair amount of tools you can use to scan for accessibility. And so a lot of schools are doing some really cool work with wide scale scanning. there are some proprietary tools that you can buy that will take care of it. I will say when I was at the University of Alabama, we had a great tool called Site Improve that we used. But that wasn't, it was pricey. It was worth it, but it was pricey. If you don't have the budget, there are tools you can implement yourself. I will kind of give a nod to Washington State University. Jeremy Felt built some really cool tools, and it's all on their GitHub that you can go and look at it, which is great. He did a talk on it at WP-Campus last year, and there's a video on our website where you can watch him talk about the tools. So I would check that out. And then North Carolina State University is doing some cool work with Brian. Brian talked about it at WordCamp US in Nashville, how they're building out these tools for wide scale testing. And so basically it's just a way to scan the site and then get the data. And so there's only, the first step is obviously education. You have to educate all the people on campus, but then you can implement, your themes and stuff in a way that really helps guide them along. But in the end, there's always going to be those outliers of things that you have to scan. In higher ed, they really love things like PDFs. And
they love their PDFs, don't they, Rachel?
And that was a struggle when I was, Alabama was trying to rein in the PDFs and what happens, in our scenario, in our case, what happened was first they went so long without a web person that their solution to putting stuff on the web and not knowing HTML was putting it in a PDF and then putting it online. And so that was definitely an issue. PDFs are really hard to be accessible. And so the solution there was, obviously having resources. They had to have a person to fix that problem. If they had a person to begin with. So there are lots of issues like that in higher education and stuff like that. But those tools are really cool. And both NC State and Washington State open source their code. So you can go and check it out. I think Brian even put the NC State plugin in the .org repo, or he was going to. But if you want more information about that, you can contact me and I can point you in the right direction.
Sounds great, because in general, if you're interested in utilizing WordPress in your education establishment, on that, that's a great resource in general, WP-Campus, isn't it? Because you've got a lot of materials on there focused on that particular area, haven't you?
Yeah, we record all of our sessions and put them on our website, so you can go watch them at any time. They're also on YouTube. We have a blog. We're starting a resources document. We have a really great accessibility document that is long and has tons of information, how to get started, some resources, some articles, references, and then a whole, probably 3-page long list of tools that you can use to help you scan for accessibility and help you learn. And what's great about most of the tools is that when they tell you what's wrong, they'll usually tell you why and how to fix it. And so it's also just a great learning experience too, because you're not just expected to know, and then, but they're helping you along the way. And then the more you do it, the more comfortable you become, the more you learn. And then it's just this really great cycle. And it really makes a difference on the internet. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thanks for that, Rachel. Also, you once a year you do a virtual meetup, more than a meetup, a WordPress, and you do a physical conference as well. So the words I was looking for, a virtual conference and a physical conference. So you were saying that the virtual conference is the end of this month, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on January the 30th, which is a Tuesday. It goes all day we start at 9 a.m. Central, which is 7 a.m. my time. It's going to be an early morning. And then we go until 5 p.m. Central. And so we have 2 tracks. And so it's 16 sessions. And it's all virtual. It's all free. You can watch from your computer all day. And there's 2 rooms you can join, things like that. Each room has a chat. You can ask questions for the speakers, and then we usually just encourage people to continue conversation in our Slack account. But it's a lot of fun. This is our second time And it's just a really great event. We started it and we plan it because accessibility reasons, as far as like people having access to the content. We know that travel budgets can be tight, especially in higher education. Time can be hard to get away. And so we treasure our in-person conference, but we want people to be able to still consume the content and to share, to speak. So, I mean, we know that not all speakers can come to the in-person, so the online is a chance to participate without having to spend money and time on travel. So that's why we started it and why we love it so much.
And we have links in the show notes to the virtual conference page, folks. So the physical conference, when have you got a date fixed for that yet?
We're finalizing that now. So we hope, my kind of hope is to announce it at the online conference, but if not, like really shortly after. We have a date and a location in mind, so we're just kind of tying down all the details before we can announce. But we're really excited about it.
So you've been doing it for a couple of years and you've been quite involved in that. Is that correct, Rachel?
Yeah, we started in fall of 2015, and then we had our first conference, the in-person conference, in the summer of 2016 in Florida. And so that was a quick turnaround, a lot of fun. We had a great time in Florida. And then we started the online conference in January of last year. So then we had our in-person this past year in Buffalo, New York. So we moved around.
You'll be moving, haven't you?
We do. Our goal is to have it. We have the event on an actual college campus, and then to move around each year. So that way we can be also to kind of increase accessibility, so we can get a little closer and move around. So if it all works out this year where we want to be, we will move west a little bit. So we're excited about that.
Oh, I'm intrigued. I might be able to come myself. So what have you learned about running two physical WordPress conferences then? Any key things you've learned from that?
Oh man, there's probably a lot that if I thought about it for a minute could lay that out. I will say it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And
I do have a full-time job at Disney, so it's all my spare time. And so, but I love it. I'm very passionate about it, which helps. And I do have a lot of help. It's not just me. A lot of people in the community are really involved in help planning. And so that's really what makes the difference. I mean, I couldn't do it by myself. And so it's a really great kind of bonding experience with everyone involved, because everyone's excited about it. And so it's also a challenge to plan a conference in a city you don't live in. And especially when you live in California and the conference is in New York or in Florida. So that brings a whole other challenge, but we have people on the ground that are passionate and that are helpful. And, and I make a lot of early Pacific time phone calls for people that are in Eastern time and things like that. You just have to have a lot of go get 'em attitude and a lot of passion for it, and everything else will just kind of come if you put in the time. But it is a lot of fun, and it allows me to meet a lot of great people and to learn a lot about what's going on and just interact with some great folks. And we have a lot of really great members in our group that are really helpful in Slack. If you're thinking about joining the Slack, it's really, really great. There's always some conversation going on, and it's not too overwhelming. It's not like it's nonstop chatter, but we have channels for everything. And anytime someone comes in there and asks a question, they usually get an answer within, a few hours, which is really cool to watch. When we want to put together a resource, like when we wanted to assemble accessibility information, I literally opened a Google Doc, and within probably like an hour or two, we had like 4 pages of information that people in the community just jumped in the doc and added it. And so watching that is it makes it all kind of worth it. And it just really makes it special to be a part of. And to know you're helping higher education in a way.
That's great, Rachel. We're going to go for our break, and then my co-host is going to take the lead, Kim. So we're going to go for our break, folks, and continue this really great discussion with Rachel. Back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had a great discussion, Rachel Cherry, all about WordPress and education and WP-Campus. I'm going to hand it over now to my great co-host, Kim. Off you go, Kim.
Thank you, Jonathan. Rachel, last time we spoke, I looked it up. It was March of 2016, and we were talking about using WordPress as a LMS, a learning management system on campuses. And at the time when we talked, a lot of people were using WordPress, but more as just a publishing platform. They hadn't quite taken the launch into truly using it more in the learning management. They were still using more of the kind of traditional learning management systems that have been around education for a long time. Have you seen a change there in that last year and a half?
Excuse me. I will say that, I have seen a growth. I can't really say how much, but we have more and more discussions about it in our Slack. We usually have a fair amount of submissions to talk about it at our events, which is great to see. You're right. The majority of WordPress usage is for just general marketing purposes. Also, people use it a lot for research, which is great. Use it to display and gather research data. When I was at my last school, I built like a whole system for it. And so that's another great use for it. And so then you do have the WordPress in the classroom type scenarios, whether or not they're straight up using an LMS or they're just using a general WordPress platform to help them with class information, things like that. And so there are a lot of proprietary LMS systems, but there are a couple of really great LMS WordPress environments, which are really great to see. And I do think people are taking advantage of them. I'm not a teacher. I can't talk too much about LMSs and how they're used, but I do think as the technology grows for them, as the plugins get better and better, and as the environment, that stuff, and I see that, I think they are becoming more and more used because people do see the benefit of A, it's much cheaper, but B, they own their content and things like that, and they probably have more control over what they can do versus proprietary systems that are given to them at the university.
Absolutely. And one of the things I have heard about that, because I'm a teacher and I work with LMSs and all, one of the things I've heard, and this is an education as a whole, not just higher, because I've been actually working with some people who are more secondary and high school, middle school type education, is the issue of getting support from the IT departments that have already adopted these other things, these other proprietary systems, whether it's Captivate or whatever. And then they're looking at it and saying, no, we could do it with this. We can do it cheaper. We can have more, exactly like you said, customization, whatever we want. But the challenge for them then is that a lot of times they're not allowed to just set up a server and manage it because of, security and firewalls and all. And it's getting buy-in from the IT department. So are you seeing us move forward with that in higher education?
So as in most environments, there's a lot of politics in higher ed, and there's a lot of, for a while, years ago, I think it's getting better, but for a while, WordPress, from my experience, definitely had some issues in higher ed with the way that IT viewed it. And a lot of it stemmed around security. And from my experience, the reason for that is what would happen is people on campus would set up a WordPress install and then set up their site and then never touch it. And then because no one was monitoring it and no one was kind of, hey, checking out this website, there was no central kind of way to like a managed dashboard or something like that. 2-3 years later goes by and the site gets hacked. And so shocker, everyone's surprised, but that happened over and over again. And then WordPress got a stigma in higher ed IT that it wasn't secure. And so I see that attitude changing a little bit as people get a little bit smarter with how they set it up and integrate it. But you do have to have buy-in, and which is a whole other conversation. I'm a big proponent of web governance, and you need to have some kind of governance at your school in order to say like, hey, we're going to use WordPress and things like that. And that's definitely an interesting struggle. It's worth it. It's when you find the schools that are doing it right, you're just like, yes. I say that attitude is changing a little bit, but that also varies from school to school. And if it's definitely worth having a conversation with IT and with whoever you need to have it with, and just sit down with them and talk with them. Push come to shove, try to find some allies on campus that can go with you. If you have web governance, talk to the governing committees, things like that. There are channels, and you may have to put in a little bit of effort, but I think it's worth it in the end. But yeah, definitely, there's politics come into play when it comes to setting up some of this stuff.
Right, and fairly to the IT people. If a site is just abandoned, there really is a security issue. It's not that WordPress quote is insecure, but if you've got something abandoned out there, we definitely, I can see their concerns for that. Have you seen any, because you mentioned some schools doing it better than others, are there any specific systems or practices that you've seen that have worked really well to allow the IT department to kind of keep track of making sure these sites are updated and they're not abandoned somewhere, so that, now you've got some email spam campaign launching off of them and it looks bad for the university's IP or gets it blacklisted, even worse?
I think there are a variety of methods. Two come to mind quickly. Multi-site is one, because it does allow you to set up a plethora of websites that all run off the same core. So as long as you update the core, you're pretty good. There are obviously some problems that come from that, management problems in the sense of you do break anything, you've broken all your sites in one place. Things like that to think about. But a lot of universities use them. They use multiple sets of them, and they'll use them for blog publishing platforms, like for faculty. So like if you're a faculty on campus and you want to blog, then you fill out a form, you get added to this multi-site network, and that way everyone has access to the same probably 2 or 3 themes. All the plugins are pre-approved. It creates a very secure, very easy to control environment that makes sure that all the sites can be audited very easily. They can be kept up to date, things like that. Another way to do it is to have separate sites, but definitely have some kind of system set in place to manage them all. And there are different ways to do that, and some of them can be technical. There are services out there that already exist. I don't know how many of them are really used in higher ed, but there are things like, I believe, like Managed WP, stuff like that allows you to kind of keep audit of your WordPress sites and the data and what plugins are on them and what version core is at. There are a variety of ways to handle that, and even ones that you can build your own. And that way, if you take this approach where in order to have a site on campus, you have to, fill out this form, there's a process. And that's kind of where governance comes into play too, to help you with that. There's a process for everything. You fill out a form, you get a website. Maybe once a year, all the sites are audited. You're contacted to make sure you're still the owner of the site. And if you're not, can we take it down? Things like that. Like there's a process that you can go through that to kind of help reinforce these problems and make sure that all of your websites stay healthy. And so the problem, in olden times that would come up and why these sites would be abandoned and hacked and things like that is because those places didn't have any kind of system set in place. They would just kind of set up WordPress sites willy-nilly. There was no log, there was no management, there was nothing. And then shocker, sites were forgotten about. And so there's a way to do it, and it's not that difficult. And so what just happens is that people have to be a little foresighted about it, come up with a plan, and just carry it out.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm excited to see it getting bigger, within the education space as a whole, not just higher ed, but education as a whole. It excites me because I know that I've had people approach me and say, my college just says absolutely not. It can't do what we need it to do. Like, They're not looking. They're not looking at it if they say that. So excellent. Thank you for sharing. I will turn it back to my host, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up now for the actual podcast part of the show, folks. We'll be continuing the discussion with Rachel, which you'll be able to see on the website with a full transcription of the interview and all the most relevant links that came up during the show. Also, you'll be able to watch the interview and the bonus part after the audio recording on our YouTube channel, which has over 200 of our interviews and our round table shows, which we have on Fridays at 9 a.m, which you can see on the Facebook, the WP-Tonic Facebook page as well, if you want to see all the interviews as well. So, Rachel, how can people get hold of you and learn some more about what you're doing?
So I'm usually pretty active on Twitter. My handle is Bama Designer, which is pretty much my handle for all social media. My website is bamadesigner.com, where you can find some more links about me and things like that. WPCampus.org is where you can go to find out about our community and to get involved. And that should take care of it.
And Kim, how can people find out more about what you've been writing, what you've been up to lately?
You can find out about all my programs at kimshivler.com. You can find me on Twitter at kimshivler.
And if you want to find out more about WP-Tonic, go to the WP-Tonic website. We're going to have some great new content this year, especially around learning management, how to set up a membership site. We've got big plans with content. You can follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Denwood, or you can go to our Facebook page and our group and join the conversations there. We're going to end the podcast part of the show. Join us next week, where we're going to have another great WordPress guest. We've got some great guests this month and in February. And we'll see you next time. Bye, folks. Right, Rachel. So basically, for the bonus content, I would like to ask you, obviously, you've had a career in education and you've moved to Disney. You obviously are a female in a very dominated male sector. Obviously, last year we had the blow up with Google about discrimination with women in tech in general. Have you felt any occasions that you've been discriminated against just solely because you're a female?
Thankfully, I haven't had to deal with anything too severe, for lack of a better way to describe it. But I definitely have had moments in my career where I've had a lot more pushback than I should have. Things like that. That's my general theme of my experiences. People pushing back on my ideas or on my progress. And for various reasons, I don't know why exactly they did it. I've had a lot of issues with one particular boss who fought a lot of things that I did, and even though they were for the general good, and so that was confusing, and why, and I don't know if he felt threatened or what it was, but things like that. So I've had some experiences. Thankfully now I have a really great boss and who really listens to me, and I feel valued, things like that. But I haven't had too many, too rough experiences, things like that. A few minor things here and there, and then that one particular boss. But a lot of it, it's hard. It's hard to be a woman in this field. I go to a lot of, I used to go to a lot of word camps, and people thought I was a designer, and maybe my Twitter handle didn't help with that, but strangers, people that I didn't know, I walk up and they'd ask me while I was there, and they thought I, was there for something else. Things like that.
Sorry. No.
Little small things like that you deal with that you're like, one time I went to a word camp and I walked up to this guy and he worked in like a security field, and I just introduced myself. I was like, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. And he immediately started explaining how websites worked to me and how security worked. And I was just like, dude, I was just saying hi, and like it was really strange.
I'm sorry to laugh, Rachel. I'm sorry to laugh.
I walked away laughing too. It was really strange. I just I think that was right after I got the job at Disney, and I kind of was just like, and then when he was done, I was trying to be nice. When he was done, he was like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I build websites for Disney. And then that was the end of the conversation. But stuff like that, you're like, you do deal with a lot of that stuff, even, at work camps, which is, which is frustrating, and it is what it is.
I just want to comment of what you said to my question. I think it's really, really difficult, isn't it? Because as you were saying about a previous boss, you or maybe other circumstances, it's really difficult to tell if it's just a personality clash. That boss or that particular individual in the organization basically just doesn't like you and doesn't like your ideas. And that might be they just don't like you, or it could be a mixture that they don't like you, B, they don't think you know what you're talking about, basically. And
so then your next question is, why do they think I don't know what I'm talking about?
No, not at all. What I meant by that is it's just personality, isn't it? Rather than a corporate culture of discrimination. And I suppose that really comes from the top, really, I feel, in any organisation. Does the top people, the CEO or the top people of a department pursue a culture of equality? Everybody's going to be treated, as long as they can do their job efficiently, they're going to be treated the same. But where there's been a lot of controversial discussion in the UK around the BBC, actually, because it was found recently that a lot of the female staff, presenters and executives and in reasonably senior positions weren't being paid the same as their male counter people. Do you think that's a factor as well? Have you ever felt that you were being paid less than the equivalent man that was doing a similar job?
Not necessarily in my experience, just because maybe a few times in higher ed. Higher ed is a struggle. Higher ed is an interesting animal when it comes to salary.
It certainly is, isn't it? It's like the British civil service, isn't it?
You don't do it for the money. I'll just say that. But they have their own issues, and usually, I worked at a university in the South, which had its own set of problems, and a lot of men at the top, and a lot of men getting paid to do nothing half the time. There was a lot of that going on. I preface all that to say they weren't in my field. They were just people at the university in higher positions that literally everyone knew they did nothing all day, but they got paid just insane salaries.
God. Well, funny enough, you're touching another thing, because also in the UK, heads of university, they're in an association, actually, and it came that a particular chancellor of a particular regional university in the UK was being paid almost $1 million, and in the end he had to resign, and that's become a big issue, the amount of money that certain key individuals in universities have been paying themselves.
Yeah, it was really frustrating a lot of times, because you see, people at like a certain level just getting paid nothing, and then myself included sometimes, and then you see people at the top getting paid just astronomical amounts of money, and most of the time they weren't doing anything. And that was really frustrating. And that was definitely like a hurdle, like a mental hurdle to kind of like, that's, you know, like, why am I here? Why am I here? Why am I here? I'm here, you know, I'm here for higher ed. I'm here because I love it. I'm here, you know, and try not to let that stuff get you down, but it's hard. And a lot of people do, you know, end up leaving. I didn't leave for Disney for the money. I left because it was Disney, but, you know, you do see a lot of people leave to go to private sector because of the money. And it's also a great experience. But, you know, people do come back, you know, like I could see myself going back to higher ed. I love it. I miss it. And so for all the problems, there's a lot of great stuff about higher ed. And you feel, when you work in higher ed, most of the time you feel like you have a purpose, and you feel like what you're doing makes a difference. And that really helps a lot. It helps you forget sometimes about the salary that you're making. But yeah, there's also with that same, to kind of go back to the boss topic, he also just was a horrible like leader.
Yeah.
He didn't, you know, like he couldn't lead to save his life. So that was, you know, and I think that's also one of the problems that we had, and that it was a personality clash too, is the sense that I kind of set myself as a little bit of a leader on campus. I created my own web community on campus, and he definitely, I think that's why I kind of go back to saying like why I think he felt threatened is because I was doing stuff he should have been doing. And
well, that is a slight problem, but also I sense in this interview, obviously we've never met before, Rachel, but I've really enjoyed the interview, and you seem a really fabulous lady, Rachel. But you also, I don't think you're pretty direct, aren't you? You know, in a not aggressive way, but in a you know, you tell it as it is, don't you? And a lot of people, some people that wouldn't go down too well, would it?
No, it doesn't.
I'd rather have it, you know, as long as it's not aggressive, I'd rather have an honest discussion myself. But a lot of people just can't handle it. It's normally... These are just generalities. But get back to the subject, so which is good news. Do you think also another factor it's been written about is that WordPress, if you're a WordPress developer, is that in the kind of hierarchy of IT, for some reason, which hopefully is changing, it's been noted that you're paid a little bit less than other IT specialised skills. Do you think that's a factor?
Well, it kind of depends on, also that depends a lot on where you're at and the environment. I know that WordPress has struggled. Hopefully we're getting out of it, but it's definitely struggled over the years with, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's how people look at it. I can't think of the word, but especially with how people look at it from other open source or just from other development viewpoints. And I'll go back as far as to say, when we were first there for a while, you know, the famous 5-minute install, that whole kind of marketing strategy for a while about pitching how easy WordPress is.
Yeah.
And I think in the long run, that really kind of bit WordPress in the butt, because it set up this mindset that WordPress is so easy. And so that, I think that definitely kind of contributed to pay, because, you know, why it's easy. Anyone can do it. You know, why should we be paying you all that much to do it? And it definitely, in higher ed, I saw it contributed to the stigma of how it was, you know, just so easy to set up all these WordPress sites, and you didn't need an actual like human or an actual developer to manage them, because everyone should just be able to willy-nilly throw these things up, and we don't need people to take care of them. And so people that are actually web professionals to take care of them as a whole. And so things like that. I do think the trying to sell WordPress as being super easy definitely had a lot of drawbacks in the end, and it contributed to a mindset about WordPress that definitely kind of placed it on as far as like a developer, level lower down, because it's easy. So as far as developer skills, you don't need that much to do it. And so I think that is a lot of it.
Yeah.
I do. And so I think that, and also I think a lot of times now, I don't do freelance, but I'm assuming, I'm generalizing here a little bit from what I can see, because WordPress is so popular and highly used. There is definitely, the marketplace is flooded with WordPress people and WordPress developers, and I will say developers and things like that and so I do know a lot of freelancers kind of struggle with how much they get paid for working on it, because it's really easy to find someone who'll do it cheaper. And whether or not that cheaper is in price or quality, but so there's lots of issues like that, and it's just we have to just navigate them how we do. But to go back to how WordPress is kind of viewed as far as a general dev standpoint, I do think there's a lot of mindsets that are a struggle to get around, and at the end of the day, you still, especially like in a higher ed situation where you're setting up all these websites for people on campus, at the end of the day, you need a me or a dev or something. You need people that are knowledgeable in website development and knowledgeable in how websites work and setting them up and architecture and servers. You still need people at the end of the day to manage them from a technical standpoint. And lest you want to get into your to those negative situations again. And so that's another political challenge in higher ed to kind of get around sometimes.
Oh, I totally agree with you, Rachel. A fantastic answer. I think I'm going to wrap it up for the bonus content. Rachel, you're going to have to join us on our Friday show if you're available, especially when you've published your date for your actual physical conference. Maybe consider joining us on the Friday show as a special guest, and you can join our discussion, and you can plug WP-Campus, the actual physical conference. How does that sound, Rachel?
That sounds great.
I really enjoyed the conversation, Rachel. It's been a blast, and me and Kim really appreciate you coming on the show. And we're going to wrap it up now, folks, and hopefully you join us next for our next interview with a WordPress junkie in some shape or form. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye.
Bye.